Hello, welcome to Season 4 of ACRO's Good Clinical Podcast. I'm your host, Sophia McLeod. Today on GCP, I'm joined by Clay Alspach, Executive Director of ACRO, Andrew Mackinnon, SVP and Executive General Manager at Medable, and Raja Shankar, VP of Machine Learning at IQVIA. Clay, Andrew, and Raja are here to discuss how the industry should be thinking about regulatory frameworks regarding AI in the global context of clinical trials. They consider efforts by the United States, United Kingdom, and others, and highlight areas where regulatory harmony is paramount. From breaking down silos to enabling a try-first mindset, the discussion highlights both the opportunities and complexities ahead. With insights on patient impact, site experience, and the next wave of innovation, this episode offers a roadmap for advancing AI that is both responsible and transformative. We hope you enjoy. Raja, Clay, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today on GCP. I think this is going to be a really exciting episode. It's one of a few we're doing on AI this year, but we're taking a little bit of a different track for this one. Clay, I figured we would start with you. The White House released its AI action plan in July of 2025 as a vision for how the U.S. could lead the world in AI innovation. And then in March of 2026, the White House released its National AI Legislative Framework, which is basically meant to give direction to lawmakers in Congress to try to move forward with that bigger picture action plan. So Clay, I was hoping you could walk us through some of the highlights as they pertain to drug development in the action plan and maybe some of that legislative framework as well.
Absolutely. And great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. As you articulated really well, AI has been a major priority for President Trump. And we saw that from day one. He spent time on it in his first administration as well. But as he kicked off his second administration, he has really put huge priority on artificial intelligence. So as you mentioned in the intro, the AI action plan that he released over the summer, I think is a really helpful for folks who just want more information on what President Trump's vision is. It's a really good place to look. And basically it has three pillars: accelerating AI innovation, building American AI infrastructure, and leading in international AI diplomacy and security. So specifically in the action plan as it pertains to ACRO and clinical research, there are specific references to discovering new materials, synthesizing new chemicals, manufacturing new drugs, and he does call for AI centers of excellence, other really key parts as well. So he released that, and then as that was moving forward, I'll kind of bring the legislative part in as well. One of the key pieces of President Trump and his AI vision is speed and literally eliminating barriers. And so as we looked at that, one of the key pieces in 2025 in the US Congress, pretty much the major priority was pushing forward his one big beautiful bill, so OBBB. And so as you look at that, the legislative kind of history on it, one of the areas that President Trump and the Republicans faced challenges was around AI. They wanted to put forward AI basically kind of preemption or a moratorium, because in the US we have the federal government, but you also have the state governments as well. And the states, what you see in the US constitutional system is this idea of preemption. So it's express preemption, where the US Congress will come forward and expressly say this is federal, so the states cannot put any legislation or regulation forward. The Republicans are trying to push forward a 10-year moratorium on AI regulation in the states. And this met with significant resistance from Republicans and Democrats. So one of the areas we always think about, where's the area of bipartisanship? Well, there was bipartisanship in its opposition. So that actually was stripped out of the bill on a 99-1 vote. One of the reasons that it was stripped out or it was cited is that basically there was nothing to go in its place. So if that were to happen, I think there were questions from Democrats and Republicans. Hey, what's in its place? What's the federal government's operating structure on AI if that's not there? And there is, I think, concern from the populace as well as the policymakers around what AI means and just what the governance is going to look like. So take that and then come back to what you mentioned in the intro. March, you see this basically Trump's vision on AI come forward, a legislative framework. It is comprehensive. It is, again, across government in terms of its application. So as we look at kind of where it goes from here, there is continued debate, discussion, hearings in Congress. President Trump continues to move forward through his vision as well. I think that as you look at like what'll happen next and where there'll be a big AI bill come forward, it just in terms of like legislative process, the bigger a bill, the bigger the idea is, the more difficult it is to get done. So as you look at AI, and I think it's pervasive, right? Across, it's not just healthcare, it's energy, it's you name it, it's there. I think the smaller and more targeted the bill is, that will foster bipartisanship. So I think all of this is to say there's a lot of work that's going to happen, a lot of action to watch. And so I could see as we go through different seasons of this podcast, which I'm sure we'll have more and more AI episodes to discuss that all. So thank you for letting me provide that intro to kind of what we're thinking about today.
Yeah, no, that was really great. I think it's good to level set what's happening here. So many of the ACRO members are headquartered in the US, so we spend a lot of time obviously talking about what's going on. But I think, the US is not alone in publishing a vision for AI leadership and growth, and a lot of other countries and regions have put out similar frameworks like the EU's AI Continent Action Plan. The UK Department for Science, Innovation and Technology has their AI Opportunities Action Plan. So Raja, I wanted to ask you, you are currently the chair of ACRO's AI committee. What do you see as some of the biggest regulatory hurdles that we would need to overcome and address before some of the goals outlined in a variety of these plans really can become a reality?
Thank you, Sophia. I think what I have noticed is when this wave of AI came out, I think in the US, they have been pretty hands off to some extent. The EU initially came with much more stringent AI Act. But as things have evolved, we are seeing more of a balance now, including in Europe, for example. They are realizing if they become too stringent, this will then kill the AI industry in Europe or do something drastical, and they need to compete here. Same in the UK. So there is the whole balance like, do we regulate or do we foster AI? When I look specifically within the healthcare context or the life sciences and the CRO context, I see both the FDA and the EMA being open to feedback from the industry in terms of shaping any regulation. Both have risk-based frameworks which broadly make sense. They're also talking to each other to align on the kind of regulation that happens across geographies, which makes sense. So I don't see necessarily there being huge regulatory hurdles yet. On the other hand, I actually see maybe sometimes there is more nervousness on the sponsor side. So what happens is there are some sponsors who are actually comfortable with the use of AI, and they come and talk to us and say, like, where are you using AI? How can we use more AI within clinical development and clinical trials so that we can get the benefit of AI, especially some of the smaller companies, the emerging biopharma sponsors are more open to this. But then we also have sponsors, especially some of the bigger companies, who are nervous and hesitant about the use of AI and want to see more stringent processes, SOPs, high levels of validation across all use cases. And what we are going through is like a process of thinking through with sponsors is, yes, we should probably follow the risk-based framework, and we need to be more stringent and more thoughtful in situations of high risk, especially when it affects patients or safety and so on. But then there are also relatively low risk use cases within clinical trials where maybe they should be a bit more experimental, permissive, and be open to the use of AI within clinical trials. Maybe, for example, like things like site selection. You can use AI. It's not necessarily directly affecting patient safety. In fact, the use of AI can actually help you get better sites and maybe with better infrastructure, and might have a positive outcome. I mean, other examples like writing a informed consent form, all right? Again, here, the benefit actually could be from from a better informed consent form, because what we face when we are actually training these kinds of AI is people say, don't use historical information because that's not going to be gold standard. Actually, you see more benefit from the use of AI because you can create better quality documents, maybe improve the patient experience here. So where I'm going with this is there's a part of this is less that there is a regulatory hurdle, but there is more sponsor nervousness around the regulatory hurdle that needs to be addressed. And part of this we are doing through ensuring that there's the right validation frameworks, right human in the loop, doing this in stages, collecting data on the use of AI and so on. So that's where we are going. And I think that will also address potentially regulatory concerns as we collect data on the experience with AI and AI agents as we go along.
Andrew, I have a question for you about sort of another angle of this global thing, but I see you nodding to a lot of what Raj is saying. Do you have anything you want to kind of piggyback on?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Raj was saying, and the sponsor's interpretation of regulatory hurdles is often as big an impact as some of the regulatory hurdles themselves. I think that the interesting thing, I think, and kind of where my mind goes, particularly kind of drawing it back to the US Act as well, there are kind of two big hurdles or two big regulatory kind of sticking points I think the industry has. One of them is kind of the absence of regulatory guidance, and obviously the pace that AI has moved at has meant that regulators take a lot of time to sit down and work out what the guidance should be and then put it in place. And what you don't want to do is to move too quickly, put in something really rigorous and directional, and then have AI move in a different direction. So that's a big challenge. I think actually more so than the absence of regulatory guidance, I think one of the more problematic areas that we have within the industry is fragmented regulatory guidance, where the regulations differ between different areas. I think that's from a sponsor perspective even more of a challenge. We already see, like, if you're developing kind of an AI assisted tool for some kind of diagnostic or something, you have to develop it differently for EMA or the FDA because of some of the guidance there, and that's a significant problem. That fragmentation is particularly problematic. And I think going back to the US Act that we started the conversation around, the international reading of that I think is going to be really interesting, and I think that how that kind of plays out is going to talk a lot to the efficacy of that act. The US Act is, and I say this coming from, I'm based in the UK, so I'm not particularly aware of a lot of the kind of the US political frameworks and those kind of things. But I think the international reading of it, it's easy to look at that act and look at it as kind of very US focused and focused very much on kind of US dominance of the AI industry. And actually, clinical research has benefited from multiple years of kind of international harmonization. The ICH it's exactly that. It's the International Council of Harmonization, and that kind of alignment of regulatory frameworks globally is a very important part of what we focus on. And my concern from if the international regulators start to see the act as being kind of as protectionist around kind of the US interests in that area, that could be problematic, and that could cause a lot of friction that's very difficult to then go and unpick. Something like clinical research is inherently global, and I think that there's a difficult kind of frictional dynamic to unpick from that side of things. So it's going to be interesting to see where the industry goes to.
So we're talking about how there are all of these very disparate regulatory frameworks, these kind of new plans that are coming out. How do you, from that global perspective and the fact that we're looking at trials around the world, how do you kind of take all of these global plans together in your mind and sort of try to make sense of where we're going with AI in clinical trials?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, clinical research, clinical trials are inherently global. The work we're doing is inherently global. We're developing medicines for global use. We often start in one place. Maybe we start in the US, maybe we start in China and Japan. We start from one place, but we are developing global medications, and everything we do as an industry benefits humankind. We're not here to focus on a specific geography, and so I think from an AI perspective, we have a huge beneficial impact that we can make in that kind of approach. AI in its nature it's not bound by geographies. It's not bound by political borders, is not bound by geographical borders. And I think any really successful act on regulating this has to have that as its kind of as its core. So yeah, I think that's a really difficult part. I think if you have a system that pursues dominance of a fragmented kind of landscape rather than unification of a global landscape, I think ultimately what you'll end up with is not a better system to develop medicines within. You'll end up with a slower system that's more fragmented, and that ultimately harms the patients in the US that this act is kind of meant to kind of start serving. So I think that those are some of kind of, say, from an outsider's perspective, looking in and reading this as an international person, that's kind of where I see some of the concerns coming out.
Mm-hmm. And Clay, I was wondering, if we look at the ACRO context of all of the sort of global regulatory advocacy work that we try to do, how do you think about the sort of US position in all of this, but in a global context as we think about the way that we advocate with regulators around the globe?
Great question. And Andrew, I just want to say thank you for that answer. It's super helpful and illuminating as to kind of how to think about this and look at it. With what you see with President Trump coming forward, one of the philosophies or principles that he's been animating and pushing through his policy, and Andrew kind of highlighted it, is America First. And so one of the questions when you hear America First is, does that mean America only? Does that mean America above everyone else? And as Andrew's well articulated, it raises some questions and concerns around just what its application is going to be. I think another angle on this to think about is that when you hear the America First, you think, oh, does that mean that FDA is going to pull back and FDA is not going to engage right on these issues or on any issue? So I think one of the pieces of at least of the pillars that I think about that could be a positive is that this is showing the priority from President Trump, and all decisions rise to Trump in the US right now. So if you look at Congress, if you look at the administration, because Congress is dominated by Republicans, everything rises to Trump. And so with that, a lot of decisions at FDA, they're rising to Trump as well. We've seen that in recent decisions where the White House has gotten involved with FDA-related decisions. I think what this does in that just encouraging and directing that basically the agencies and departments have a global view means that FDA needs to move forward and engage with international regulators. So I think that's a good thing, that they have the direction from the White House and the permission to go ahead and do that. So you did see earlier this year, EMA and FDA came forward with a joint AI principles. I think that's a really positive direction, right? And so I think hopefully that will continue. And I think that's one thing ACRO will do is continue to encourage FDA to come forward and to engage in international collaboration, whether that's through ICH or other opportunities. In addition, I think from an ACRO perspective, we see this AI as one of those areas where international convergence from the regulatory side would be very helpful in terms of ensuring that innovation continues and patients are ultimately, get the drugs that they need. One of the things we're doing in September, we're going to host a regulatory summit. And one of the key issues that we'll discuss with the international regulatory community is AI. So we're really looking forward to having that conversation and encouraging all regulators to work together to enable that fragmentation to disappear as much as possible, and so that we can get the clarity needed to keep advancing all the research forward. So hopefully that helps, but that's the kind of thought we have from the ACRO perspective.
And just to kind of expand on, because I think, Clay, you raised some really interesting points there. That kind of, American leadership, America First kind of approach that's taken here. That American leadership and global collaboration it's not a binary choice necessarily. AI, particularly within the realms of clinical research, kind of leadership and dominance there is not a zero-sum game. There is a position where we can all win. Now that's very different when you look at some of the other use cases within, kind of military and those kind of things. Then it becomes a zero-sum game. So we want to make sure we kind of differ between those two things. And I think a positive note that I would like to take with this is the clinical research industry has historically been pretty good at finding ways in which kind of US leadership can be expanded into global collaboration. We see, the FDA, rightly so, is a leader in drug medicine related regulatory policy. There are a lot of areas in the world that follow the lead of those kind of things. And so we have been very good at that. The ICH that I mentioned earlier is another great example of where we've been able to work globally on that. So I think what we have to take a look at is how we can approach AI within clinical research, within drug development, with that same kind of constructive ambition, and just make sure that we don't, kind of, as I say, make that kind of American leadership, America first, and global collaboration into a binary choice and react accordingly. So I think that that's something within our industry we have to caution ourselves against and be very careful to keep a close eye on and work with our regulators to help them understand where some of the challenges that the implications of that would manifest.
So Andrew, it's a good point. And it's interesting because the economic interests are also different in healthcare, right? So if you think about defense, yes, you have your own military and somebody else has their own military, right? Whereas in the case of healthcare, it's American companies who also sell in Europe and who also sell in China, who also sell in Japan. So it's in America's interest that there is regulatory harmonization because it helps, even America First would help American companies in other geographies. The same holds for European companies and companies in other geographies. They want to do well, not just in their geography, but across geographies. So there is a economic and therefore a political interest for that kind of harmonization, which exists in healthcare, aside from the fact that it would benefit patients everywhere. The economic interests also line up. And that's why we see that some kind of harmonization or coordination between EMA and FDA that is happening.
I think we've highlighted some challenges, and rightfully so. I think we should, in the spirit of positivity, think about some of maybe the opportunities that we can see coming from this and other action plans we're seeing around the world. I'm just going to call them all action plans at this point, just for ease. I think one of the things that we could maybe think of as a positive thing coming out of what the US is looking at is this whole of government approach, where they really want to break down silos across agencies, departments. And when we think about this idea of breaking down silos, but from an industry perspective, Raja, I know you've written about how the real value of AI is rooted in connecting intelligence across silos so that insights and information can flow seamlessly. So can you talk a little bit more about the opportunities you've seen in the industry from connecting across whether it's clinical, regulatory, or commercial silos?
So this is a very interesting question. I'll start with an example from another field, mathematics. I was actually listening to Dr. Hannah Fry, who works with DeepMind. She's a mathematician in the UK. She was mentioning how the new wave of AI is changing mathematics. Because previously, mathematicians would use computers to solve single problems or specific problems in narrow areas. But now, with all these big models, they have mapped out the entire mathematics landscape. So if a mathematician goes to solve a problem, they can immediately see a connection with another field in mathematics or another area in mathematics, and it creates new opportunities to solve math problems in new ways. And I see the same analogy within healthcare, right? So we have had data that is siloed, of course, across geographies between different countries. We also have expertise that is siloed between the clinical, regulatory, market access, and commercial space. But AI now first provides the opportunity to connect data across. So in many cases, if we have, like we are building large models today, like large life sciences models across all of our data. So when we look at it, I don't need to now harmonize my data in the US and UK and Germany or between EMR and claims and so on. I can actually use new waves of AI to generate patterns and insights from all of this data together. And they can be structured data, unstructured data, they can be clinical data, they could be lab data, they could also be commercial data. And I could actually have the intelligence to look at all of this and find patterns and make connections that was not possible before. And by being able to do that, I can think of like, okay, I'm trying to develop a clinical trial. And previously you would say, I'm going to do one piece of analysis to say, is this going to work in this patient through some PKPD modeling? Another piece of analysis would be like, is this going to actually be successful from a technical perspective or a regulatory perspective or access? And what's the peak sales? Now I can bring all of this data together to build models that can give me in one go, like the probability of technical, regulatory, operational, access, and commercial success. And how do I do trade-offs, not just within a specific domain like country and site selection to optimize operational success or protocol complexity and so on. I could look at this in this entirety and see what is the balance between technical success, commercial success, operational success, and how do I develop those scenarios. We are not there yet, but this is sort of within reach, and this is the kind of areas that we are working on. And I want to really emphasize this because we see a lot of AI that has been used on the discovery space. And we just released a R&D trends report recently from IQVIA. And one of the interesting things that is coming through that is we are seeing more AI discovered molecules coming through to phase 1 and phase 2. We are also seeing that phase 1 success rates of AI discovered molecules are higher than non-AI discovered molecules. And when we get to phase 2, they are similar, but the AI discovered molecule success rates are going up, but they're reaching the same as non-AI discovered. What this means is we are addressing discovery very well with AI. And as we see more of these molecules come through or more of these treatments come through, the bottleneck will come within clinical development and clinical trials. And this is where we need to do all of this connected data. The next wave of AI is to address the clinical bottleneck, both in terms of increasing success rates of trials. So we go from, say, maybe 1 in 10 or so drugs that make it all the way through to maybe a better probability of success, but also from an operational execution point of view. How do you increase the success rates? How do you improve the quality of what we do? I think that's where the next wave of opportunities, and this makes me really excited. Discovery is being solved, and now we are focusing on solving clinical development and clinical operations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Andrew, I'm wondering from, where you sit at Medable, are you seeing these silos persisting? Are you seeing more collaboration as work on AI grows? Like, how do you look at all of this?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I agree with everything Raja says. That the silos definitely still exist. That there are still kind of challenges in breaking down some of those. I think AI and the use of AI has been really interesting in identifying some of those silos that maybe people didn't perceive before. The utility of a data set that's created in one place to kind of influence and help solve and understand a problem in a different place is something that AI has been fantastic at doing. So, kind of that linkage of data across different systems has been very powerful. And so I think that's where some of those silos are being kind of broken down, because the utility of breaking that silo down is now becoming more and more relevant. Previously, when it was human focused work to do that kind of cross kind of silo data analysis, that was a very challenging task to do. It took huge amounts of effort. So actually breaking down that silo, it's difficult to see the value of doing that, because I'm just going to create huge amounts of extra work, and it's going to take years to complete the analysis. AI is able to do that analysis in seconds, if not minutes. And so the value of combining those kind of data becomes increasingly valuable. And so that the value of breaking that silo becomes greater and greater. And I think that the companies that we're seeing now that are kind of ahead of the curve of this kind of work are those companies that are treating all of those data sets as long-term assets. They're not just building towards a submission deliverable. I've done the submission, great, I'm good. Like all of that data, there's cyclical. The data that you've generated, preclinical, clinical, and even into commercial is coming back around, and as Raj says, helps you develop better trials, better drugs that will drive kind of greater future success. And I think 100% agree with Raj that at the moment the focus on all of the AI work into the preclinical space is driving this avalanche of new molecules that are going to have to go through that clinical trial funnel, and that's going to become what we're seeing is that the preclinical space is becoming kind of stratospheric in terms of how quick it can do, and yet we're still stuck with this glacial paced clinical trial funnel, and that's the biggest silo. I mean, that's multiple silos in one place, but that's the biggest silo we have to start addressing. Because as I say, we're here to get, all of us work in companies that have that, we get drugs to patients faster. That's all of our mottos. We're going to have to double down on that because we've got there's a lot of really valuable, beneficial assets coming through that pipeline that we need to speed to market.
Well said. There's another part of the action plan that I wanted to talk about, which is this idea of sort of promoting a try first. For people who are just listening, I'm doing quotes, but a try first mindset where, you kind of promote the idea of stepping out of the box, trying something new, and having that be rewarded. Andrew, I'll start with you, but would love to hear from everyone. How do you take that message? Do you see this direction in the plan, or just in general as something that would ideally encourage FDA to support companies, pushing the boat out a little bit more than folks maybe think that they do today?
It's a really interesting kind of concept to think about, particularly within the framing of clinical research. We've got that kind of AI, big tech, Silicon Valley type approach of kind of run fast and break things, and that's great in that space when you're doing those kind of things. It can work really well in isolated environments within protected servers and all of those kind of things. That's great. The aversion we have to risk within clinical research is grounded in very, very sensible things. It's not an irrational fear at all. If you're launching a consumer app and you run fast and break things and it goes wrong, not an awful lot happens at the end of it. If you do the same thing in clinical research, the potential downside is patient harm, and we have to make sure we avoid that as much as possible. That said, that there is a huge amount of benefit that AI can bring, and I think we're some of the lack of trust we have of some of those kind of technologies within clinical research does hold us back. So I really hope that kind of try it mindset is something that we start to instill, and we work out a way of driving innovation into that kind of space, because as I said, it absolutely has to be done. So I think what we really need to see alongside that kind of try first mindset is really clear guidance from the regulators on how to do well-designed AI-based innovation. What they want to see, we don't want to see it stalled by regulatory uncertainty. We don't want to see it stalled by fragmented regulatory guidance. We need to make sure we don't go down the route of over-regulating this space. We don't want to introduce genuine barriers, but at the same time, we don't want to remove important safeguards. And so I think that try first, that mindset, I think, is important. The industry has struggled with innovation in the past. We've seen countless companies go through huge innovation runs that don't ever get anywhere, these pilots that just kind of fail, and often because they haven't been kind of properly planned and scaled in their approach. So hopefully, long-winded way of saying yes, I really hope that try first mindset is something that is instilled, but with that right level of rigor and caution that we have within the clinical research industry.
I would just add, Andrew, is there is failure in other industries too, right? So we see a lot of pilots fail, but like for every Uber, there are probably like 50 other things that didn't succeed. The one thing I would add in this space is a lot of the focus from sponsors, CROs, etc., has been on, we are doing X today. Can we do X better with AI? And also from that perspective, there are existing SOPs and regulations that we can follow. What I think will change is, as with past technologies, we may be able to do things that we couldn't do before, and we don't know what those are yet, right? And that is going to come, and that's where I think from a sponsor and CRO perspective, we need to have a try first mindset to, at least in a safe way, think about new possibilities that AI affords for value that we don't know yet. And from a regulator perspective, to have an environment that you don't kill that ability to come up with new things, but you foster that, but with the right kind of guardrails that you need to prove it and so on. That's where, for me, a higher level of excitement. Yes, I could write an ICF faster, and it's important that we do that. But are there things that we could be doing within the clinical development space that we couldn't do before, and that would allow us to get to patients faster? One particular idea for me is, if we are able to simulate in silico what happens in vivo, can we create simulated data? Can we have digital twins or synthetic data that reduces the size of the trials and actually puts less burden on patients to go through experimentation before we actually get to a proven treatment? I don't think we are there yet, and I don't think this is going to change within 6 months or a year or so. But this is an area where we can think about getting drugs to market with maybe fewer patients in trials and therefore faster. But also, as more and more drugs are coming through, they are all competing for the same patients. Then maybe there's a new way of generating evidence. That's the kind of thing I think it's going to be exciting and interesting, both from a sponsor perspective, CRO perspective, and also from a regulator perspective.
The important thing, I think, for the industry is also to bear in mind what it is that we're using and what it is that we're trying here. The frameworks, the measurements, the standards that we are used to holding technology to is 100% perfection. I ask a system a question 100 times and I get exactly the right answer every single time. And if I get it right 99 times, the system fails and I go back and I redo it. AI works in a very different manner. We're not expecting, in the same way that if you took 100 CRAs, gave them the data set in a trial, and asked them what is the next best thing for you to do to move that site forward, you're going to get maybe not 100 different answers, but you're definitely going to get one single answer. And I think that's where we have to look at how we validate, how we measure, how we monitor AI based within clinical research, and hold them to a different. It's not a lesser standard. It's a more stochastic approach to how things. We're not deterministic with this kind of tool, in the same way that humans aren't. And I think that's an interesting mindset shift for technologies that we need to. And if we're going to try, we have to, as you say, Raja, we have to understand that what is failure, and what is something that is acceptable and unacceptable.
Clay, from the DC policy people perspective of all of this, do you see FDA becoming supportive of this mindset? Are they already? We've got a lot of new people at the agency who came in with the new administration. Do you think they bring a new way of thinking about this? What are you seeing from where the FDA sits right now?
There definitely is a strong interest in the utilization of AI, right? Whether it's from the sponsor or the CRO perspective and how it's being utilized for clinical research, as well as internally and utilizing AI. We saw the ELSA, they're rolling out of different systems to try to bring it as part of their workflow and as part of their analysis. So that is, I think, kind of the mindset that governs here. A couple points around that, though. The first is the try first and that piece of it. I think it needs to be kind of considered in the whole idea of what is the FDA's motto, right? It's to protect the public health. It's to protect patients. And so that's always got to be considered. And I think that will be where the agency always sits as it's kind of analyzing whether it's the utilization of a tool or where AI sits. Anything, that's just how they're going to analyze it. So I think that's just an important consideration here. The second piece is, as we look at FDA, I think one of the challenges we all have with AI, and especially the agency, is it moving so quickly, right? And its opportunities, or we're seeing the opportunities around it so much. And so we have the draft guidance that still hasn't been finalized. And as you look at that draft guidance and kind of where we were in 2025, we're in a different place now. And so what I think from the agency perspective, consideration is what's the best way for them to understand kind of where the ACRO members are, where the broader community is on the utilization and potential of AI, and to get that information, and also to express kind of their views on things. And so just would say that one of the key pieces, at least this has been a principle of the Trump administration that they've articulated, is transparency. And so I think that's something that I think needs to be brought in and needs to be part of FDA's consideration here, is that how do we have that communication? How do we have the transparency on what AI tools have been utilized, whether it's what FDA has done or whether it was part of the application that was utilized as part of that. And the more that can be provided and we can see and understand that, I think the better off we're all going to be. And it's just something from a regulatory perspective, we think about the different tools they have to enable that communication with industry. Hopefully they'll just lean in very heavily on that transparency part.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked a lot about these big aspirational, big vision type of plans, and I think that's great. But I do think we would be remiss to not think about the patients and how they receive all of this. How do you think AI is being perceived at the site level, at the patient level, and what work do you think we still need to be doing to hopefully ensure that sites and patients are comfortable with AI in the way that it's being used through their experience in a clinical trial? Raja, maybe I'll start with you, and then Andrew, if you want to jump in.
So I think that's a very good question. I actually think today patients and potentially sites are also more open to this of AI. Patients are already going to ChatGPT and asking questions about their health. We are seeing innovation like open evidence and others coming that can help make better decisions for patients using AI. I think from a clinical trial perspective, really improving both the site experience and the patient experience from AI is going to be quite critical, right? So an example for patients could be a couple of examples. Informed consent form can be very onerous for them, can be simplified, make it easier. Another example is when patient apply for clinical trials or they search for clinical trials, they have to answer a lot of questions and a particular trial doesn't work, then they get dropped out of the system. Can you have a system where and this is something we're working on, like, can we think about like asking questions in an intelligent way that if they're not eligible for one trial, maybe they are eligible for another trial, and then something of value is created for them, but also the questions are based on what they answer and if you can link to other data. So increasing the experience for patients is there. On the sites, the same kind of thing. Sites have to deal with multiple sponsors, multiple CROs, there's to and fro questions. Every time there's a contract, for example, that needs to be written, they have to go through the whole process again. Can we simplify this by knowing past contracts that were done, that you already get a populated contract, and have something where the interaction between the site and the sponsor and the CRO is much more seamless with AI and agents. So I see there are a lot of opportunities. This is the next wave from the productivity benefit is to some of this experiential and quality benefits that would be there. So some of these are coming up. I'll probably give it to Andrew now. Maybe he has additional ideas here of value that can be created for sites and patients.
Yeah, I think it's certainly an area of great enthusiasm from site, particularly sites. I think that there is an element, I think, within the general population. We hear a lot of kind of scare stories and a lot of mistrust of kind of AI and tools. So I think that there is an aspect there that we need to address as an industry as a whole. From a site perspective, we spoke a lot about the massive investment in preclinical that's driving the number of molecules, assets that are going to be developed. All of those are going to come into the clinical trial pipeline. That means exponentially more clinical trials being done, and every clinical trial is done by sites and involves patients. And so whilst we've spoken a lot about, tools simplifying consent writing and writing protocols and setting up all these kind of things that are kind of sponsor and CRO focused, we have to look at the same kind of tools to make clinical research easier at sites. Each clinical trial has a huge administrative burden on a site. It's a difficult thing to do. And so we have to look at how we can simplify the implementation of trials at sites. No one gets into clinical research, no one gets into medicine full stop because they love paperwork and administration, but that is what a lot of clinical research is. So, the more we can do to remove that burden from sites and the people at the coalface of our industry, and make it easier for them to do those trials, the better we're going to be all around. And I think there's a huge amount of areas we can focus on. What we need to make sure we do, though, is we don't just start implementing tech for tech's sake in trials and giving sites a lot of different systems again and compounding some of the problems that we've already got. We have to look at unification of systems, simplification of workflows, removal of steps of processes. All of those kind of things has to be where we focus on from a site perspective, or we won't see the benefits of everything else that we've spoken about already on this podcast.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I want to round us off here on this episode thinking about the future. I was originally going to ask you guys where you think we're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, and then I thought things were moving way too quickly that I won't even recognize where we are in 5 years. So let's maybe go for a shorter term view. And I'd love to get each of your thoughts on what you see as the most exciting area, maybe of what's possible in AI and machine learning in the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years. Andrew, I don't know if you want to kick us off, and then we'll just kind of go around.
And I think you could probably almost take that time frame and reduce it to 2-3 months, and we'll do things. It's moving that fast. It's kind of hard to keep up with it. I've heard it said, and I think it's a really strong statement and one that I can absolutely get behind. The single greatest benefit that AI will bring mankind is in medicine development and human health. And so I think that seeing that play out over the next 2 to 3 years, I think is kind of the single greatest thing that we can see coming out of a lot of this. Everything that we've already spoken about. The development of more accurate drugs, of better positioned drugs, of personalized medicine. All of those kind of things are going to come through. I think, personally, just from where Medable is working out within clinical research, I think we genuinely have an opportunity to significantly increase the capacity of the industry using AI-based tools to run clinical research and exponentially increase the amount of drugs we bring to market. I think, over the last decade, we haven't seen an increase in the number of new drugs approved by the FDA. It hovers around the 45 to 48 mark every single year in, year out for the last decade, even further back. So all of that innovation that we've put in has done some really amazing things, but it hasn't sped those drugs through that pipeline quick enough. And over the next 2 to 3 years, I think we will see a significant improvement in that, both from how we put things through, also the AI tools that will speed regulatory review and approval. The tools the FDA have got will start to speed that piece up. So I think that's what I would love to see in the next 2 to 3 years, and I'm genuinely confident that we will start to see it. The foundational models are already capable and competent enough to do a lot of that, so we've just got to get on and implement.
I see like a couple of areas that will actually help us get more and better drugs to market sooner. One is on the operational side, when we go beyond the simpler agentic use cases to think about the totality of the operational data that we have in the CTMS and the TMF, etc. And then we build models on this. We could be able to predict like downstream risks and protocol deviations at a site patient level. That helps us to proactively prepare for these kinds of risks and mitigate this. So operationally, we might see some things happen that go beyond RBQM that we do today. So that's one. And then the second thing it goes back to what I was saying before, is we're able to simulate in silico what happens in vivo. Then we may be able to even do new kinds of trials with digital twins, but maybe even something that's slightly different to an RCT today, where we try to compare on average what happens in one trial arm to on average what happens in the control arm, to say, I take this particular patient and I have a counterfactual digital twin of this patient. What would have happened without this treatment and what happens with this treatment? These kinds of things could start to emerge, and that could revolutionize how we actually prove the value of drugs. And maybe that helps us get more drugs, more personalized drugs to market faster.
I think Andrew and Raj did an awesome job kind of walking through the details, and they're the experts on that front. I would just say what they're articulating in terms of the promise, it's going to happen, but it will be enabled because of education. And I think we really have a huge role here as a clinical research community to really help folks understand. AI is going to have societal impacts, and some of it may not be all positive. I think Andrew talked about this earlier, the importance of nuance around AI. I think that's something that we should really have to take into account and to help folks understand and try to distinguish it from some of the negative impact. Because what we see with new technology, especially in healthcare as it comes forward, when you're talking about potential and talk about moving stuff forward, it's very easy to demagogue and to bring forward misinformation that will frankly inhibit it and keep it from reaching its potential. So I think it's almost like starting now, we really have to help folks understand this is what it's doing now, this is what it could do going forward, and we should open this up and enable and foster it and not cut it off. We shouldn't take it for granted that this is just going to come forward. I think this does hold a lot of promise. It's require a lot of work on our part to help patients, help the public, help policymakers understand, so that they can be with us as we move it along and move it forward.
With that, thank you so much for joining, and we might have you back on a future episode to see where we're at in a few years, months, maybe months.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for tuning in to ACRO's Good Clinical Podcast. We'll be back next week with a new episode.